In the hushed aftermath of the storm, as the last echoes of thunder faded, I found myself standing on a precipice, not a jagged cliff overlooking a churning sea, but an internal chasm, vast and terrifying, that had opened beneath my very soul. My world, once a tapestry woven with certainty and purpose, had unraveled with a swift, brutal pull. Every thread of conviction, every vibrant hue of belief seemed to have been torn away, leaving behind a bleak and desolate landscape. This wasn't just a moment of doubt, it was an exodus of the spirit, a profound disorientation that left me questioning everything I had ever held dear. And in that raw, exposed vulnerability, I began a journey, not just to reclaim my faith, but to discover who I truly was, stripped bare of all the assumptions and expectations that had once defined me. It started subtly, as crises often do, a whisper of unease, a flicker of doubt in the periphery of my spiritual vision. But then the whisper became a shout, the flicker a raging inferno. For me, that inferno was fueled by a confluence of events, a devastating personal loss that ripped a hole in the fabric of my family, a professional setback that shattered my sense of competence, and a gnawing disillusionment with certain aspects of the world around me, particularly the injustices I witnessed. Each blow, a hammer against the edifice of my faith. I remember sitting in the quiet of my prayer mat, the words of the Quran feeling hollow, the movements of Salah mechanical, devoid of the connection that had once sustained me. It was like speaking a language I no longer understood, performing rituals whose meaning had vanished into thin air. The pain was not just emotional, it was existential. If God was truly all-merciful, all-wise, why had this happened? Why did I feel so utterly abandoned? These questions, once unthinkable, now screamed in my mind, echoing the despair that was taking root in my heart. I retreated, not just from my community, but from myself. The vibrant, engaged Muslim I had once been, the one who found solace in daily prayers and strength in communal gatherings, was slowly replaced by a shadow, haunted by doubt and consumed by a profound sense of loss. I felt like a stranger in my own skin, a hollowed-out vessel adrift in a sea of confusion. The very air I breathed seemed thin, devoid of the sacred oxygen that had once nourished my spirit. Every morning felt like waking into a denser fog, every evening a surrender to a deeper, more suffocating darkness. The initial shock gave way to a relentless period of intellectual and emotional wrestling. I delved into books, not just religious texts, but philosophy, history, even science, seeking answers, any answer that could make sense of the chaos within me. I questioned everything, the very existence of God, the truth of revelation, the purpose of suffering. Nights were spent in a whirlwind of internal arguments, battling an unseen adversary. My own mind turned against itself. I'd pick up an old beloved copy of the Quran, its pages soft from years of handling, but the words blurred, flattened, losing their vibrant three-dimensionality. It was as if a veil had fallen, not over the text but over my own eyes, obscuring the light. I'd read about the steadfastness of prophets, the unwavering faith of martyrs, and feel a sharp, agonizing pang of inferiority. How could they endure such trials and maintain their conviction, while I, facing my own relatively mundane struggles, was crumbling into dust? The weight of expectation, both self-imposed and perceived from others, became an unbearable burden. I remember one particularly dark night, the kind where the moon seemed to hide its face, and the city outside was muffled by a heavy quiet. I was staring at the ceiling, my eyes burning, tears streaming down my face, whispering, or perhaps more accurately, tearing from my throat in a raw, ragged gasp. "Where are you, God? Where are you?" The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum that sucked the very breath from my lungs. It wasn't just an absence of sound, it was an absence of presence, a chilling confirmation of my own terrifying isolation. It was a terrifying experience, akin to losing your footing in a bottomless pit, spiraling endlessly with no hope of finding solid ground. This wasn't just a crisis of faith, it was an identity crisis. If my faith was a cornerstone of who I was, the very bedrock of my being, what was left when that cornerstone crumbled? Was there anything left of me? Or was I just a collection of anxieties and broken pieces? The fear was palpable, fear of eternal damnation. Yes, a cold dread that clung to my bones and whispered of unimaginable torment, but also a more immediate, visceral fear of losing my moorings, of drifting aimlessly in a world without meaning, a ship without a rudder, cast out onto a turbulent, endless ocean. My family, seeing my struggle, offered comfort, their voices soft, their eyes filled with concern, but it often felt like a language I couldn't comprehend. Their unwavering belief, while a source of strength for them, sometimes felt like a chasm between us, a stark reminder of what I had lost, what they still possessed. I yearned to feel what they felt, to find that peace, that unshakable certainty, but it eluded me like a phantom, just beyond my outstretched fingers. Each well-meaning word of encouragement, each gentle reminder to just pray, felt like a weight, pushing me deeper into my despair. I wanted to believe, God, how desperately I wanted to believe, but the wellspring of faith within me felt utterly dry. The world outside continued its relentless pace, indifferent to my internal cataclysm. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. My once vibrant social life withered. Phone calls went unanswered, invitations politely declined with vague excuses about feeling unwell or being too busy. Conversations felt like performative acts, each word a carefully constructed facade to hide the tumult within. I would nod, smile, offer platitudes, all the while screaming internally. How could they not see the gaping wound in my soul? How could they not feel the tremor of the earth beneath my feet? I started avoiding eye contact, afraid that the emptiness in my own gaze would betray me. The very act of living, of performing the mundane rituals of existence, became an exhausting charade. I'd find myself walking the streets, a phantom in the bustling city, the sounds of traffic, the chatter of passers-by, the insistent ringing of phones, all reduced to a distant hum. I was present, yet utterly absent. My mind replayed arguments against faith, scenarios of absolute meaninglessness. It was a relentless loop of despair, a self-inflicted torture. I'd avoid mosques, the very places that once felt like sanctuaries, now felt like places of judgment, where my whispered doubts would be amplified, where my lack of devotion would be laid bare. I imagined eyes on me, discerning my hollowness, my disconnection. Of course, this was largely a projection of my own self-condemnation, born of the deep shame that had settled within me, but it felt agonizingly real. The shame was a heavy cloak, suffocating me further, preventing me from reaching out, from asking for the help I so desperately needed. Sleep became a battleground. Nightmares haunted me, images of vast empty spaces where I was falling endlessly, or chasing a fleeting light that always vanished just beyond my grasp, leaving me in total darkness. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the terror of spiritual annihilation clinging to me like a shroud. During the day, an insidious fatigue permeated my bones, making even the simplest tasks feel monumental. Getting out of bed felt like lifting a mountain. Showering, eating, even just holding a conversation, demanded a Herculean effort. My body mirrored the exhaustion of my spirit. I was operating on autopilot, a ghost navigating a world that demanded a presence I no longer possessed. My appetite waned, food tasted like ash, and the vibrant colors of the world seemed muted, dull. And then, there was the silence, the deafening, aching silence where God used to be. I'd try to force myself to pray, to read the Quran, to connect, but it was like shouting into an abyss. There was no echo, no response, just the horrifying confirmation of my own isolation. The once comforting sensation of being enveloped by divine presence was replaced by a cold, vast emptiness. This was the true torment, feeling utterly alone in the universe, severed from the source of all comfort and meaning. My once intimate bond with the divine felt irrevocably broken, leaving me with a profound sense of orphanhood. I was adrift, without anchor, without compass, and without the North Star that had always guided my way. The ache in my chest was a constant companion, a dull, persistent throb that reminded me of the void. But even in the deepest valleys, seeds of resilience can lie dormant, waiting for the first drop of rain. For me, that first drop came not from a grand revelation, not from a sudden lightning bolt of divine understanding, but from a quiet, persistent yearning. Despite the doubt, despite the pain, a tiny spark remained, a flicker of memory of the profound peace I had once experienced in prayer, the comfort I had found in the Quran. It was almost imperceptible at first, like the faintest scent of rain on dry earth, a barely there whisper in the clamor of my despair. It was the memory of a warmth, a sense of belonging, that my fractured soul still dimly recalled. This yearning wasn't about finding answers, it was about finding solace. I began to seek out small moments of quiet reflection, not with the intention of praying, not with any religious obligation, but simply to sit with my discomfort, to acknowledge the ache in my soul. I started taking long, solitary walks, deliberately leaving my phone behind, letting my feet carry me wherever they wished. I'd feel the sun on my skin, its warmth a gentle, unassuming presence, the breeze in my hair, a cool caress against my fevered mind. I'd listen to the rustle of leaves, the chirping of unseen birds, the distant murmur of life. These simple acts, divorced from any religious framework, began to soothe a part of me that had been raw and exposed. They were small, almost insignificant rebellions against the overwhelming grip of despair. I remember one crisp autumn morning, the air sharp and clean, walking through a park where the leaves were a riot of gold, crimson, and burnt orange.
I wasn't thinking about God or faith, I was just observing the intricate patterns of the leaves, the quiet dignity of the trees, their branches reaching up like silent prayers. I watched the tireless scurrying of a squirrel, its tiny paws meticulously burying acorns for a future it couldn't fully comprehend. And in that moment, as I inhaled the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a gentle warmth spread through my chest. It wasn't a religious feeling, not exactly, but a deep, almost primal sense of awe, a recognition that even if my inner world was crumbling, the outer world was still breathtakingly beautiful, still operating with an incredible, undeniable order, a symphony of life and decay. It was the first time in months I felt a flicker of something beyond despair. It was the whisper of something larger than myself, something that still was, even if I couldn't name it, even if I couldn't understand it. It was a moment of grace, unbidden and undeserved, a small hand reaching out from the vastness. I also found myself drawn to stories of others who had faced similar struggles, not just religious figures from history, but ordinary people, contemporary individuals. I read biographies of artists who had endured periods of profound creative block, scientists who had faced years of failed experiments, activists who had confronted seemingly insurmountable injustices, losing everything, only to rebuild from the ashes. Their honesty, their vulnerability, their eventual emergence from the darkness, offered a glimmer of hope. It was a reminder that I wasn't alone in this wilderness, that doubt was not necessarily the antithesis of faith, but sometimes a painful, albeit necessary, precursor to a deeper understanding, a more robust and resilient conviction. These narratives became my lifeline, a quiet assurance that survival was possible, and perhaps even growth. They showed me that the human spirit, in all its fragility, possessed an astonishing capacity for resilience. The journey back was not a sudden leap, not a dramatic conversion, but a painstaking step-by-step ascent, like climbing a treacherous mountain path, one careful foot placement at a time. It began with small, almost imperceptible shifts. I started listening to recitations of the Quran again, not to actively understand the words, but to simply let the sounds wash over me. I focused on the rhythm, the cadence, the emotional resonance that had once moved me so deeply. Sometimes I would just have it on in the background as I went about my day, a gentle hum of memory. And then there were moments, just fleeting moments, where a particular verse, a specific melody, would pierce through my defenses, a sudden recognition of beauty, a pang of longing for the peace and connection I associated with those sacred sounds. It was like hearing a forgotten melody that stirred a deep, unarticulated part of my soul, a dormant seed beginning to twitch in the dark earth. It wasn't belief, not yet, but it was recognition, a tremor of warmth in the spiritual frost. Then, slowly, tentatively, I started to explore my faith from a different perspective. I moved beyond the rigid dogma and the narrow interpretations that had once felt restrictive, even suffocating. I began to see Islam, not just as a set of rules and prohibitions, but as a vast, multifaceted path to a deeper relationship with the divine, a way of life that encouraged self-reflection, compassion, and justice. I consciously sought out scholars and teachers who emphasized the spiritual heart of Islam, who spoke of love, mercy, and the beauty of creation, rather than just legalistic rulings. Their words resonated with a part of me that had been starved for nourishment, a part that yearned for spiritual sustenance beyond mere intellectual assent. I found myself drawn to Sufi poetry, to the ecstatic, passionate verses of Rumi, Hafiz, and Attar, which spoke of a love for God that transcended logic and dogma, a love born of longing and intimacy, a divine madness that embraced all of existence. This was a language my wounded heart could finally understand, a balm to my aching soul. It spoke of a God who was not just a stern judge, but a beloved, a friend, intimately present in every breath. I also started to engage with my community again, but this time with a different intention, a profound shift in perspective. Instead of seeking validation for my beliefs, or trying to conform to an external standard, I sought connection, shared humanity. I found solace in the simple act of being present, of listening to others' stories, of offering a helping hand without expectation of return. These interactions, devoid of the pressure to perform or to project an image of perfect piety, slowly began to rebuild my shattered sense of belonging. I realized that faith wasn't just an individual pursuit, a solitary spiritual endeavor. It was a shared journey, a tapestry woven with the threads of many lives, each struggling, each striving, each seeking. I started volunteering at a local food bank, distributing meals to those in need. In the simple act of serving, of looking into the eyes of someone else who was hurting, of offering a warm plate and a kind word, I found a strange kind of healing. It pulled me out of my own head, out of my own self-pity, and connected me to something tangible, something profoundly compassionate. It was in giving that I began to receive, in tending to others' wounds that my own began to mend. One of the most profound shifts in my journey, a true turning point, was the radical realization that my crisis wasn't a punishment, not a divine retribution for some perceived failing, but an invitation to redefine my relationship with God, with myself, and with the world around me. I began to see my doubts not as weaknesses, not as flaws to be hidden or overcome, but as catalysts for profound growth. They had forced me to dig deeper, to question assumptions I had blindly accepted, to dismantle the edifice of inherited belief, and forge a faith that was truly my own, not simply handed down or prescribed. This was a challenging but immensely liberating truth. It meant that the God I sought was not fragile, not easily offended by my honest questions, but vast enough to encompass my doubt, patient enough to wait for my slow, arduous return. It meant that faith wasn't about having all the answers, but about the courage to live with the questions, to seek, to wrestle, to yearn. I started to journal, pouring out my fears, my raw questions, my tentative hopes onto the page. This act of self-expression, of writing without filter or judgment, became a form of prayer, a direct, intimate conversation with the divine, unburdened by formality or expectation. I learned to be brutally honest with God, to express my anger, my frustration, my confusion, my despair, knowing that even in those raw, unfiltered moments, I was still somehow connected. I remember one entry scribbled late at night in a fit of pure desperation. God, I don't know if you're there. I feel nothing. But if you are, please, just a sign, any sign. Because I'm drowning, and I need to know if there's anything to hold on to. And then, in the days that followed, I would find myself noticing tiny, almost imperceptible moments of beauty or kindness. A bird singing a particularly sweet melody outside my window. A sudden, unexpected text from an old friend. A stranger offering a genuinely warm smile. Were these signs? Perhaps not in the dramatic, cinematic sense of a blinding light or a booming voice, but they were gentle nudges, subtle reminders that beauty and goodness still existed, that the world was not entirely devoid of warmth. They were small threads of light in the vast darkness, and I learned to grasp them, to cherish them. I also began to practice gratitude, consciously acknowledging the small blessings in my life, the warmth of the sun on my face, the simple joy of a child's laughter, the comforting taste of a home-cooked meal, the quiet comfort of a soft blanket on a cold night.
This simple practice, often overlooked in times of crisis when our focus narrows to only what is lacking, slowly but powerfully shifted my perspective from one of pervasive lack to one of subtle abundance. It reminded me that even amidst profound pain, there was still beauty, still goodness in the world, if I only chose to look. It was a conscious effort to rewire my brain, to seek out the light, even if it was just a tiny flicker in the overwhelming darkness. And as I practiced consistently, diligently, the flicker grew, gaining strength, pushing back against the encroaching shadows. It was like tending to a tiny, fragile flame, protecting it from the wind until it could burn brighter, warmer. As I slowly healed, as the fissures in my soul began to mend, a new dimension of my faith emerged, the profound, transformative power of empathy. Having walked through the dark valleys of doubt and despair, having experienced the chilling isolation of spiritual abandonment, I found myself with a deeper understanding, a more expansive, more compassionate heart for others who were struggling. I no longer judged those who questioned, those who strayed from the path, those who felt lost and uncertain. Instead, I saw their pain, recognized their vulnerability, and instinctively offered a hand, not of judgment or correction, but of understanding, of shared humanity. I realized that my suffering, though intensely personal and agonizing, had forged a bridge, a profound connection to the suffering of others. It was a painful gift born of brokenness, but a gift nonetheless. I started actively seeking out opportunities to listen, truly listen, to others' stories, not with the intention of advising or fixing, but simply to hear, to bear witness to their journeys. I connected with people from different backgrounds, different faiths, even those with no faith at all, and found common ground in the universal human experience of struggle and longing, of joy and sorrow. It was in these shared moments of vulnerability, of mutual recognition of our shared fragility and strength, that I felt most connected, most authentically human. My faith became less about boundaries and exclusive truths and more about bridges, about connection, about the shared spiritual quest that unites us all. It was less about who was in and who was out and more about the boundless embrace of a love that transcends all divisions. I realized with a clarity that felt almost blinding that faith isn't about having all the answers neatly packaged and explained, but about having the courage to ask the questions, even the uncomfortable, unsettling ones. It's not about being immune to doubt, about never faltering or stumbling, but about finding strength in vulnerability, in the raw honesty of acknowledging our limitations and fears. It's not about a rigid, unyielding adherence to dogma or tradition, but about a living, breathing relationship with the divine that evolves and deepens with every challenge, every triumph, every moment of surrender. My crisis, though agonizing in its intensity, had stripped away the layers of superficiality, the borrowed certainties, leaving behind a more authentic, more resilient faith. It was a faith forged in the crucible of suffering, tempered by doubt, and illuminated by the quiet, steady light of self-discovery. It was no longer a borrowed faith, a hand-me-down inherited from my parents or my community, but one that I had earned, one that was uniquely mine, woven into the very fabric of my being through sweat and tears. I learned that true faith isn't about blind obedience, about shutting down inquiry or suppressing intellectual curiosity. Instead, it's about a profound sense of trust, a deep spiritual reliance, even when the path ahead is shrouded in mist, when logic fails, when the future is uncertain. It's about knowing, deep in your bones, in a place beyond words or reason, that there is a wisdom and a mercy beyond your finite human comprehension, even when it feels like everything is falling apart around you. It's about letting go of the desperate need to control, to understand every detail, to exert my will over the universe, and simply surrendering to the vastness and benevolence of the divine plan. This surrender wasn't a sign of weakness. It was an act of profound, courageous strength, a daring leap into the unknown, trusting that I would be caught. It was the deepest breath I had ever taken. And so here I stand today, not on a precipice of despair, but on the fertile ground of hard-won wisdom. My faith is not a pristine, unblemished jewel, sparkling with untarnished perfection. No, it bears the beautiful marks of the journey, the glorious scars of the struggle. But those marks, those scars are not blemishes. They are not imperfections to be hidden or ashamed of. Instead, they are testaments to resilience, to growth, to the unwavering grace that carried me through the darkest nights. They are badges of honor, etched onto my soul, proof that I faced the abyss and by divine mercy and inner strength did not break. They tell a story of survival, of transformation, of a spirit refined by fire. The journey of faith, I've come to understand with a clarity that pierces through all pretense, is not a destination to be reached, a final goal to be achieved, but a continuous, dynamic unfolding. There will undoubtedly be new challenges, new doubts that whisper in the quiet hours, new moments of questioning that arise unexpectedly. But now I face them with a different heart, with a deeper understanding of my own capacity for resilience, forged in the crucible of past trials, and with an unshakable trust in the boundless divine mercy that guided me through the storm. I no longer fear the shadows, for I know that within them, the light of my own strength and the steadfastness of God's presence will ultimately reveal itself, guiding me through. The darkness is no longer an enemy, but a teacher, a necessary contrast that illuminates the light. This transformation has been profound, affecting every fiber of my being. It's not just about believing in God again, intellectually or emotionally. It is about believing in myself, in my inherent capacity to navigate hardship, to find meaning even in suffering, to emerge from the deepest depths with a renewed sense of purpose and a spirit more finely tuned. My faith has become more expansive, more inclusive, more compassionate, encompassing the vastness of human experience, both joy and sorrow. It's less about rigid definitions and narrow interpretations, and more about the boundless, all-encompassing embrace of divine love that permeates every atom of existence. It's a faith that understands suffering, not as a sign of abandonment or punishment, but as a mysterious, sometimes agonizing crucible that refines the soul, stripping away the superfluous and revealing the sacred essence that lies within. I carry within me the echoes of those dark days, the faint scent of fear and despair, but they no longer define me, no longer hold me captive. Instead, they serve as a powerful, poignant reminder of how far I've come, of the incredible, almost unfathomable strength that lies dormant within each of us, waiting to be awakened by adversity, waiting to be called forth by the very challenges we dread. The peace I feel now is not the naive absence of struggle, not a state of blissful ignorance to the world's harsh realities, but the profound presence of an inner stillness, a deep-seated tranquility that can withstand any storm, any upheaval, any sorrow. It is a peace born of acceptance, of surrender, of profound gratitude, and of a deep, abiding, and utterly unshakable connection to something infinitely greater than myself. It is a peace that comes from knowing, with every beat of my heart, that even when the ground beneath me trembles, I am held. If you find yourself in a similar place, adrift in a sea of doubt, buffeted by the winds of crisis, know this: with every fiber of your being, you are not alone. Your questions are valid, your struggles are real, your pain is seen, and within you lies an inherent capacity for resilience, for healing, for self-discovery, a light that can never truly be extinguished. Do not be afraid to confront the darkness, for it is often in the deepest shadows that we find the most profound illumination, the most surprising insights. Do not fear the questions that rattle your foundations, that shake the very ground beneath your feet, for they are the very tools that will help you rebuild those foundations, stronger and truer than before, built on bedrock, not shifting sand. Embrace the journey, embrace its every twist and turn, even its darkest, most desolate moments, for it is in the depths of despair that we often find the purest light of hope, the most unexpected pathways to transformation.
It is in the shattering that we truly learn to rebuild, not just our faith but ourselves, emerging stronger, wiser, more compassionate, and more deeply connected to the divine tapestry of existence than ever before. Allow yourself to feel the pain, to acknowledge the loss, to sit in the discomfort of uncertainty, to weep the tears that need to be shed. But also, crucially, allow yourself to seek out the small glimmers of light, the quiet whispers of hope, the gentle nudges towards healing, for they are always there, if you only open your heart to perceive them. Trust the process, even when it makes no sense, even when it feels like you're walking blind. Trust that even when you feel most lost, most abandoned, there is a guiding hand, a boundless mercy, a profound wisdom that is gently, patiently leading you home. Home not just to your faith, to the rituals and beliefs you once cherished, but to your authentic self, to the person you were always meant to be, stripped of pretense and adorned with truth. This journey is not about finding answers that magically silence all questions, about reaching a point where doubt ceases to exist. No, it is about finding a way to live with the questions, with a heart open to wonder, with a spirit resilient in the face of adversity, and with a profound sense of peace that transcends understanding. And ultimately, it is about discovering that true faith is not a rigid doctrine, a set of unbreakable rules, but a living, breathing, dynamic relationship, a sacred embrace capable of holding all your doubts, all your fears, and all your hopes within its boundless, all-encompassing love. May your journey be one of profound self-discovery, marked by courage and illuminated by grace, and may you find the deepest peace and solace that awaits you on the other side of the storm.